What's on your radar, Ryan?
Well, a little less than 10 years ago, an American named Shez Kassim, who grew up mostly in the UAE, helped make a satirical video that lampooned a new class of rich Emirati teenagers who tried to play act as tough guys. We have plenty of these types of teens in American suburbs, but the difference is that in the UAE, you can be thrown in prison if you offend the wrong person. The video Shez posted, called The Deadly Satwa G's, was as tame as you can imagine. Here's a little clip of their parody.
Excuse me, it's a very dangerous area. Where are you going?
What are you? Stop talking to us. I'm sorry, fine, man.
It is very dangerous.
Fine, we're all right. Thank you.
عبود ما يفهم هذا.
We're okay.
Okay, you will see what will happen now.
Stop
Okay,
being
okay,
creepy.
okay. Think this is a big joke. It's not joke, it's satwa.
So they can't just walk down here, right?
No! Very dangerous.
When he was arrested and jailed for that, he immediately offered to delete the video, but authorities mocked the idea, telling him YouTube was an American company. So of course he had no power to make YouTube take the video down. That was the beginning of a long odyssey that would take Shez into the bowels of the UAE's prison system, charged with a post-Arab Spring cyber law that basically criminalized any post that was even slightly spicy. Shez was first locked up in a facility in Dubai, a city known more for its glitz and its indoor ski mountain. There, many of his fellow prisoners were workers who'd been charged with, quote, absconding, which is the crime of quitting your job. I spoke with Shez after he got out, and he said that one man was jailed for telling his boss he had gotten a better job in Malaysia and would be leaving. Many others were similarly confined for the offense of switching jobs. Of all the depredations he faced in the 9 months he spent behind bars, the bathroom is the one he said he'll never forget. He told me there was a single toilet that didn't flush for roughly 130 men. Instead, prisoners would dump bucket after bucket of water, hoping to ease some of the ooze further down. His first week, he tried to eat as little of the food as possible, not to protest the conditions, but to avoid having to use the can. One day, the prisoners managed to get bleach from the guards, he said, to try to do something about the wall of stench in the bathroom. They poured it. They took the bleach, they poured it into the trough, and once it seeped in, an army of maggots began rushing to the surface and into the bathroom. We woke them up with that bleach, Shez told me. Later in his stay, a prisoner who knew some of the guards arrived, and he persuaded his friends to give the inmates steel brushes and cleaning supplies. The man whipped a volunteer team together. When I first saw that toilet, I thought it was a clay toilet. The water was black, like crude oil. We scrubbed that toilet so hard, I found that toilet was made of stainless steel. On that day, I found out the clay was just feces that had been collecting for years. His first night, he slept outside in a fenced-in courtyard, but after that, won himself a mattress and a blanket, neither of which were ever cleaned. He told me, quote, "It's difficult to lie on the mattress with that blanket because the stench is so horrible." Recalling one particular inmate who came in, quote, with bleeding pustules, he and a handful of other inmates tried to help the man, who was bleeding from bizarre places head to toe, and finally managed to get the guards to come look at him. Once they had, says Shez, he was thrown back in jail and they gave him a blanket, which he used, and he left a week later, and that blanket went right back into circulation. The food, well, you get the point. The food was awful. So Shez's parents back in Minnesota hired a US-based attorney and another one in Abu Dhabi, blowing through their savings, even though the attorney was never allowed to meet with Shez. He was eventually convicted, though he knows little about how his own trial went, since it was conducted in Arabic, which he doesn't speak. He later learned he was done in by a confession he had unknowingly signed, which was written in Arabic, a tactic that Amnesty International says is endemic in the UAE. While he was confined, his case caught the attention of Will Ferrell and Adam McKay, who were shocked to learn that the UAE would imprison a man for a piece of sketch comedy. Minnesota lawmakers reached out to the UAE ambassador Yusuf Al-Otaiba, sending him a formal letter but also raising the matter privately. The pressure finally worked and Shez was freed, but 4 other people who helped with the video weren't so lucky. Shez's case was one of many that drew international outrage, and international outrage isn't good for business. So the UAE needed some rebranding help. They would become the happy place. Dubai police plastered a giant smiley face on their police station, and they created a ministry of tolerance and a ministry of happiness. Not long after Shez was released from the filthy restroom that doubled as an Emirati prison, Jeffrey Sachs was in the UAE praising the country's, quote, wise leadership. Sachs is a Columbia University professor who's become prominent around the world as an outspoken critic of the inequality and suffering produced by unchecked global capitalism. His endorsement of Bernie Sanders in 2016 forced some in the media to start taking the campaign more seriously. He began his career, though, as a neoliberal ideologue who pushed the IMF and World Bank in the 1980s and 90s to immiserate much of the third world in the name of structural adjustment. That's slashing social services and cutting taxes and regulations in exchange for meager foreign investment with huge strings attached. He later rejected his earlier work and since then has been a powerful voice for the world's poor, particularly as a proponent of measuring and working to improve people's happiness. That's why it's been such a coup for the UAE to have him acting as a cheerleader for the Emiratis. And that's why it's also worth knowing, as my colleague Mara Fistendahl reported last week, that Sachs has gotten millions from the UAE for his research. The UAE, she reported, has given $3 million to a UN-linked nonprofit that Sachs runs, and also $200,000 to Columbia University for happiness research. The Emiratis also funded a previous outfit he ran, but the organization declined to say how much it gave. The funding goes toward creating the annual UN World Happiness Report. Here's Sachs and two of the study's other co-authors at a conference in the UAE talking about happiness.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Now, for the survey to be done right, we've got to get the answers right in the survey. It's not me singing and us clapping. It's us singing and us clapping. Can you handle that? Okay. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. There you go.
Go on. Cartoon of the class of children clapping their hands, except for one of them, and the teacher says, he is happy, but he doesn't know it.
Exactly.
Jeffrey Sachs, have we lost touch with reality here?
No, we're doing fine.
So from 2017 to 2019, the UAE had an average global ranking of 19 in the Sachs-produced report, ahead of France, Spain, Italy, etc. on the ranking of happiness, and they love to brag about it. It's hard to define happiness, of course, but perhaps the report also has a hard time defining people. Because for people in the UAE, it can be a crime to quit your job to go home or to quit your job for another one. Add on the fact that traffickers often gobble up nearly all the money a worker earns, and you'd have a hard time distinguishing that system from slavery. The only way they can score so high on the happiness index is by not counting the lives of those people. It's like saying that the people of the South before the Civil War were extremely happy. Well, yes, the ones sitting on gorgeous piazzas sipping mint juleps were no doubt quite happy. The people who made that possible, not so much.
That is the grossest radar you have ever done.
I
that
hope I
middle
will ever
section,
do.
yeah.
I hope I will ever do.
Fast forward through that, people. It was bleak. Great reporting. It's terrible. It's terrible. I'm not a big fan of Jeffrey Sachs. He's a shill for the CCP. He's just the pro-China guy in all those ways. And
so there's an interesting quote in Mara's article from the former head of Amnesty International. It was either Amnesty International or ACLU, saying, we actually have been concerned about Sachs for a long time because of his amoral willingness to just take money from any place in order to fund, his type of anti-poverty projects or his happiness research or whatever he's into. And the place you're going to go for a lot of that funding for a very long time was the UAE, but also China is spending an enormous amount of money, both in Africa and also in Latin America. Through its expansionary diplomatic push, which at least is better than kind of a marine landing somewhere. Give him that. But what it does is, he justifies it to himself, saying that he's doing something to reduce poverty. But meanwhile, the UAE, gets to continue to run this kind of dystopian society and now rebrand it as a place where everybody's just smiling and happy. Clap your hands if you are.
So yeah, so that was a dystopian kind of. I've never thought about how that song is kind of right. Clap your hands. It's an if, but it doesn't feel like an if because you have to clap.
You have to clap. Why are you not clapping?
Right.
You're happy and you just don't know it.
Right. Measuring happiness sounds like kind of a pseudoscience anyway.
I mean, it certainly is, and I'd say I'm for this. I'm for the general idea of trying.
Ryan Grimm is for the general idea of happiness.
Yes, I'm pro happiness.
Despite your grim appearance.
This is true. This is true. If you don't want to be happy, you don't have to be.
You don't have to clap your hands.
And you don't, and you shouldn't be pressured to be happy.
Right.
But I do appreciate the idea of encouraging societies to improve the happiness and well-being of their people. I think that seems fine.
Well, I will be happy if we never revisit that toilet story, but no,
I can't forget it.
Oh, great reporting.
Now neither will you be able to.
Yes.
Looking forward to what's on your radar up next.